The crisp, white envelope felt like a lead weight in Liam's hand. He knew what it was before he even opened it. Another HOA violation notice. Another thinly veiled threat from Karen, the president of the Homeowners Association and the self-appointed.
Welcome to Karen Chronicles. Before we begin, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so we can continue creating even better content. Thank you so much. All right, let's get started.
Guardian of their suburban paradise, or as Liam increasingly thought of it, his suburban prison. He ripped it open, his jaw tightening as he scanned the all-too-familiar block of text. $500, vehicle limit violation. $500 a month for parking his own cars in his own driveway. Liam had 3 vehicles. His trusty Ford F-150, essential for his contracting work, the family's well-worn SUV, crammed with kids' sports gear and the remnants of countless road trips, and his baby, a '67 Mustang Fastback, a restoration project that was slowly but surely coming back to life. It was his escape, his passion, a gleaming piece of American history. And according to Karen, it was one car too many. It had started subtly. At first, it was just passive-aggressive notes left on his windshield. Friendly reminders about the HOA's parking guidelines. Then came the photos. Liam would find pictures of his driveway, crudely circled in red marker, slipped under his door. Karen, he imagined, lurked in the shadows, her phone her weapon of choice, documenting every perceived infraction with the zeal of a seasoned private investigator. The latest violation notice wasn't even based on an existing rule. It was something Karen had seemingly conjured out of thin air, effective immediately, it declared. Residents are limited to two vehicles per household. Any additional vehicles must be parked off-site. There had been no community vote, no discussion, just Karen's decree, delivered with the cold, impersonal authority of the HOA letterhead. Liam wasn't alone in his frustration. The whispers started in the driveways, at the mailbox cluster, during the awkward, forced smiles of neighborhood barbecues. Maria, his next-door neighbor, a sweet woman with a green thumb and an infectious laugh, had been fined for having unapproved flower pots on her porch. Apparently, her vibrant petunias clashed with the HOA's approved palette of earth tones. Old. Mr. Henderson, a retired veteran who could barely walk without his cane, had received a warning for letting his grandkids leave their bikes on the sidewalk for a grand total of 10 minutes while they grabbed a glass of lemonade. Even Sarah, the seemingly perfect soccer mom who always had freshly baked cookies for the neighborhood kids, confessed to Liam that she'd been cited for having a non-regulation bird feeder. The stories were all the same. Petty rules. Arbitrary. Enforcement, and Karen, always Karen, lurking at the center of it all. It was a low-grade fever of anxiety that had settled over the entire neighborhood. People were afraid to paint their front doors, to plant a new tree, to even let their kids play outside, without fearing the wrath of the HOA, and more specifically the wrath of Karen. The once friendly waves and casual conversations had been replaced by furtive glances and hushed complaints. It wasn't just about the money, although the fines were adding up. It was the principle of the matter. It was the feeling of being constantly watched, judged, and controlled. It was the sheer audacity of one person wielding so much power over their neighbors' lives, all in the name of maintaining property values. Liam crumpled the latest violation notice in his fist. He'd had enough. This wasn't about parking spaces anymore. It was about something much bigger. It was time to fight back. He wasn't sure how, but he knew one thing. Karen had picked the wrong guy to mess with. The quiet, peaceful suburb was about to get a whole lot less peaceful. The simmering resentment in the neighborhood was reaching a boiling point. Every new fine, every absurd rule, every smug glance from Karen fueled the fire. But while most residents felt trapped, Liam was quietly, meticulously laying the groundwork. for a revolution. He wasn't just a contractor, he was also a savvy real estate investor with a portfolio that stretched far beyond his own meticulously maintained, Karen-approved, of course, home. For the past 5 years, Liam had been executing a plan so subtle, so intricate, that even his closest friends were unaware of its existence. He'd been buying up properties in the neighborhood one by one, using a series of LLCs, limited liability companies, to mask his identity. Each LLC was a separate entity, a shell, making it virtually impossible to trace the ownership back to him. He started small, acquiring a rental property here, a foreclosure there. He played the long game, patiently accumulating properties like a chess master positioning his pieces. He'd initially seen it as a smart investment, a way to diversify his holdings. The neighborhood was desirable, the schools were good, and property values were steadily rising. But as Karen's reign of terror intensified, his motivation shifted. It became less about profit and more about justice. He saw the fear in his neighbor's eyes, the stifled anger, the slow erosion of community spirit. He realized he had the power to do something about it. His plan was audacious, bordering on brilliant. He needed a controlling interest in the HOA, a majority stake that would allow him to dismantle Karen's empire from the inside. He crunched the numbers, reviewed the HOA bylaws, which he now knew better than Karen herself, and identified the key properties he needed to acquire. He moved quickly, quietly, making offers that were too good to refuse. He leveraged his connections, used his knowledge of the market and, when necessary, sweetened the deal with a little extra cash. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place on a Tuesday afternoon. Liam sat in his home office, staring at the screen of his laptop. The confirmation email from his lawyer blinked back at him. Acquisition complete. You now control 67% of the voting rights within the Neighborhood Name Homeowners Association. He leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. 67%. More than enough to call a special meeting, amend the bylaws, and most importantly, remove Karen from power. He thought of Maria and her unapproved petunias, of Mr. Henderson and his grandkids' bikes, of Sarah and her non-regulation bird feeder. He thought of all the petty fines, the ridiculous rules, the constant fear that Karen had instilled in the neighborhood. It was time for a change. It was time for Karen to face the music. The hunter was about to become the hunted. The reign of the HOA tyrant was coming to an end. Liam, the quiet contractor, the unassuming neighbor, was about to become the unlikely hero of his suburban saga. He picked up his phone and dialed his lawyer's number. "It's time," he said. "Let's call a meeting." The community room buzzed with nervous energy. Karen, dressed in her usual power suit, a severe navy blazer and a skirt that screamed authority, stood at the podium, a smug expression plastered on her face. She'd called an emergency meeting of the HOA, ostensibly to address ongoing concerns regarding parking and community aesthetics. Everyone knew what that really meant. More fines, more rules, and more of Karen's reign of terror. On the projector screen behind her, a blurry photo of Liam's driveway flickered. 3 cars, parked neatly, innocently. To Karen, they were symbols of defiance, of a blatant disregard for her meticulously crafted rules. She tapped a laser pointer at the screen, her voice dripping with disdain. "As you can see," she began, her voice amplified by the room's cheap microphone, "we have a persistent problem with residents exceeding the approved vehicle limit. This blatant disregard for our community guidelines creates unsightly congestion and negatively impacts property values." She paused for dramatic effect, letting her words sink in. "Therefore, I propose we implement a new fee structure." She launched into a lengthy, droning presentation, filled with charts, graphs, and even more blurry photos of offending vehicles. She talked about community harmony, aesthetic consistency, and the importance of adhering to the bylaws. The residents shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, a mixture of boredom and resentment swirling in the air. Liam sat quietly in the back row, watching Karen's performance with a detached amusement. He'd seen this show before, the self-righteous indignation, the fabricated statistics, the thinly veiled threats. But this time, things were different. This time, he held all the cards. He waited until Karen was in the middle of a particularly passionate rant about the detrimental effects of improperly parked vehicles on curb appeal before he made his move. He stood up slowly, deliberately. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to him. "Karen," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I think it's time we had a little chat about who really controls things around here." Karen blinked, momentarily thrown, off balance. Mr. Miller," she stammered, "this is an HOA meeting. You're out of order." Liam smiled. "Actually, Karen, I think you're out of order. You see, I've been doing a little investing in the neighborhood lately." He paused, letting the suspense build. "Quite a bit of investing, actually." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. He held them up for everyone to see. "These," he announced, "are the deeds to 67% of the properties in this community, deeds held by various LLCs, all of which I control." A gasp rippled through the room. Karen's face went pale. The smug expression vanished, replaced by a look of utter disbelief. What are you saying?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm saying," Liam said, his voice ringing with authority, "that I own the majority of this neighborhood, and according to the HOA bylaws, which, by the way, I've read very carefully, that means I control the HOA. You, Karen, are out." The room erupted in a cacophony of whispers, gasps, and murmurs of disbelief. Karen stood frozen at the podium, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. The blurry photos of Liam's driveway, once symbols of her power, now seemed like pathetic remnants of a defeated regime. The hunter had become the hunted. The queen had been dethroned, and the neighborhood, for the first time in a long time, breathed a collective sigh of relief. The courtroom was packed. The news of Liam's takeover of the HOA had spread like wildfire through the neighborhood, and everyone wanted a front-row seat to Karen's downfall. Liam, sitting calmly at the plaintiff's table, exuded a quiet confidence. He wasn't seeking revenge, he was seeking justice. His lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Alvarez, addressed the judge. "Your Honor, we are here today to demonstrate a clear pattern of abuse of power, financial malfeasance, and outright harassment by the defendant, Ms. Karen Thompson, former president of the neighborhood name Homeowners Association." The evidence was overwhelming. Ms. Alvarez presented a mountain of documents, stacks of violation notices, bank statements, emails, and even secretly recorded audio and video clips. First, there were the fines. Hundreds of them, levied against residents for the most trivial of offenses: improperly placed trash cans, unapproved garden gnomes, excessively loud wind chimes. The list went on and on. Ms. Alvarez showed how these fines disproportionately targeted residents who had dared to question Karen's authority, or who simply happened to be on her personal dislike list. Then came the financial records. Ms. Alvarez meticulously dissected the HOA's bank statements, revealing a pattern of suspicious transactions. Large sums of money had been withdrawn for community improvements, but there was no record of where the money had actually gone. Instead, there were receipts for luxury spa treatments, expensive dinners, and even a suspicious payment to a contractor, who, it turned out, had done extensive renovations on Karen's own home. "Your Honor," Ms. Alvarez declared, "the defendant has been using the HOA's funds as her personal piggy bank. She's been lining her pockets with the hard-earned money of her neighbors." The most damning evidence, however, was the video footage. Liam, with the help of a few tech-savvy neighbors, had installed hidden cameras in strategic locations around the neighborhood. The footage showed Karen in all her glory. Karen at 3 a.m., dressed in a bathrobe and slippers, using a ruler to measure the height of Mr. Henderson's grass. Karen sneaking around Liam's property, snapping photos of his cars from various angles. Karen screaming at a teenage girl for riding her bike on the sidewalk. Karen using leaf blower to blow leaves to the other homes. The courtroom erupted in laughter and gasps as the videos played. Karen, sitting at the defendant's table, shrunk in her chair, her face a mask of shame and fury. Her lawyer, a hapless young man who looked completely out of his depth, attempted a feeble defense. "Your Honor," he stammered, "my client was merely acting in the best interests of the community. She was, diligently enforcing the bylaws." Ms. Alvarez pounced. "Diligently enforcing bylaws that she made up herself, diligently embezzling funds for personal gain, diligently harassing her neighbors in the middle of the night." The judge, a stern-faced woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, had seen enough. "Counselor," she said to Karen's lawyer, "I suggest you advise your client to cooperate. I'm ordering a full independent audit of the HOA's finances. And based on the evidence presented today, I'm inclined to believe that Ms. Thompson has a great deal to answer for." Karen's face crumbled. The game was up. Her reign of terror was over. She had been exposed, not just as a petty tyrant, but as a crook. The courtroom buzzed with the sweet sound of justice being served. The fallout from the courtroom showdown was swift and decisive. The court-ordered audit revealed the full extent of Karen's financial misdeeds, confirming what everyone had suspected. She had been systematically looting the HOA's coffers for years. The judge ordered her to repay every penny, a sum that totaled tens of thousands of dollars. She was also permanently barred from holding any position of authority within the HOA, effectively ending her reign of terror. With Karen out of the picture, Liam called another meeting, a real meeting this time, with proper notice and a democratic agenda. The community room, the same room where Karen had once held court, was filled with a palpable sense of hope and relief. People were smiling, laughing, actually talking to each other without fear of reprisal. The first order of business was the election of a new HOA board. Liam, despite being the driving force behind Karen's removal, declined to run for a position. He'd done what he set out to do, restore fairness and sanity to the neighborhood, and he had no desire for power or control. Instead, a slate of diverse, reasonable residents were elected, including Maria, with her unapproved petunias, and Mr. Henderson, who promised to advocate for the rights of senior citizens and their grandkids' right to ride bikes on the sidewalk. New board immediately set about dismantling Karen's legacy. The absurd rules were rescinded one by one. The fines were forgiven. The HOA bylaws were rewritten to be fair, transparent, and focused on fostering a sense of community, not enforcing arbitrary standards of conformity. The atmosphere in the neighborhood shifted dramatically. People started planting flowers again. Without fear of being fined for choosing the wrong color, kids played freely in the streets, their laughter echoing through the once silent cul-de-sacs. Neighbors started talking to each other again, sharing stories, recipes, and even occasionally a glass of wine on the porch. As for Karen, her fate was sealed. The financial penalties, combined with the legal fees, had wiped her out. She was forced to sell her house, the very house she had lorded over with such tyrannical zeal, and move out of the neighborhood. The day Karen's moving truck pulled away was a day of quiet celebration. There were no parties, no parades, just a collective sense of relief. As the truck rumbled down the street, disappearing around the corner, a few neighbors gathered on their porches, raising their glasses in a silent toast. It wasn't a toast to Karen's misfortune, but to the restoration of their community, to the triumph of fairness over tyranny, and to the simple joy of living in a neighborhood where they could finally breathe free. The Karen era was over. The healing could begin. The story of Liam's victory over Karen and the tyrannical HOA spread far beyond the boundaries of their quiet suburban neighborhood. Local news outlets picked it up, then regional, and finally, national. The tale of the unassuming contractor who took down a power-hungry HOA president resonated with people across the country. It was a David versus Goliath story for the modern age, a testament to the power of community and the importance of standing up for what's right. Liam's phone started ringing off the hook. Emails flooded his inbox. People from all over the country, facing similar struggles with their own HOAs, reached out to him for advice, for guidance, for hope. They shared their stories of petty rules, outrageous fines, and abusive board members. They saw in Liam a champion, a symbol of resistance against the often unchecked power of homeowners associations. A documentary filmmaker even contacted him, proposing a feature-length film about his story. Liam, initially hesitant, eventually agreed, realizing that the film could reach a wider audience and potentially help even more people. He wasn't interested in fame or glory. He simply wanted to share his knowledge and experience to empower others to fight back against injustice. He started a website, a forum where people could share their HOA horror stories, exchange tips, and organize collective action. He consulted with lawyers, offering pro bono advice to residents facing legal battles with their HOAs. He became an unlikely advocate, a voice for the voiceless, a champion of the common homeowner. Liam realized that the best revenge wasn't about destroying Karen. It was about building something positive, something lasting. It was about helping others find their voice, about empowering them to stand up for their rights, about creating communities where fairness and reason prevailed over petty tyranny. The satisfaction he felt from helping others far surpassed any fleeting pleasure he might have gotten from seeing Karen suffer. One evening, months after Karen's departure, Liam sat on his porch, watching the neighborhood children play in the street. The sounds of laughter and carefree chatter filled the air. Maria, his neighbor, waved to him from her porch, her unapproved petunias blooming brightly in the evening sun. Mr. Henderson, cane in hand, was supervising a group of kids, playing a spirited game of tag. The community had come alive again, vibrant, connected, and free. Liam smiled. He'd started this journey seeking justice for himself, but he'd ended up finding something much more profound, a sense of purpose, a connection to his community, and the satisfaction of knowing that he'd made a real difference. He'd not only defeated Karen, but he'd also helped to create a better, fairer, more humane world, one neighborhood at a time. And that, he realized, was the best revenge of all. The saga of Karen and the HOA, while seemingly a simple neighborhood dispute, offers profound lessons that resonate deeply, especially as we grow older and reflect on the lives we've lived and the communities we've built. It's a story that speaks to the enduring importance of fairness, courage, and the power of collective action, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles. One of the most crucial takeaways is the reminder that power unchecked can easily corrupt. Karen's unchecked authority within the HOA allowed her to act arbitrarily, prioritizing her own preferences and biases over the well-being of her neighbors. This is a universal truth, applicable not just to HOAs, but to any situation where authority exists, in government, in business, even within families. As we age, we gain wisdom and perspective, and it becomes our responsibility to speak out against abuses of power, no matter how small they may seem. The story also highlights the vital importance of community. When neighbors are isolated and fearful, tyranny can thrive. But when they unite, share their concerns and support one another, they become a force to be reckoned with. Liam's success wasn't solely his own. It was the result of a collective effort, a shared desire for a better, fairer neighborhood. In our later years, community becomes even more precious. Maintaining connections, offering support, and participating in the life of our surroundings are essential to our well-being and to the health of the society we leave behind. Furthermore, the story underscores that it's never too late to stand up for what's right. Liam could have simply accepted the status quo, paid the fines, and grumbled in silence. But he chose to act, to use his skills and resources to challenge injustice. Age is not a barrier to courage. In fact, it often brings with it a clarity of purpose and a willingness to fight for what matters. Our experiences give us a unique voice, and we should never hesitate to use it. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, the story teaches us about the true meaning of victory. Liam's ultimate triumph wasn't about revenge or personal gain. It was about restoring justice and fostering a sense of community. He found greater satisfaction in helping others than he ever could have found in humiliating Karen. True fulfillment comes not from dominating others, but from contributing to the well-being of those around us. As we age, legacy takes on new significance. The most meaningful legacies are built on kindness, compassion, and fairness, not petty grievances. These values form a strong foundation and one worth fighting for.